Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go through the essentials of party wall surveying. Guys, so if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe somewhere around here. Hit the notification button so you can get videos, so you can get notified every time we upload a video. Thank you. Andrew Shilley, nice to meet you. Jay Munoz, nice to see you again. So, what basically, you know, you've been part of our power team for a while, and I thought, what a great opportunity now that we are on site and we got people working doing the superstructure works. But it might be, I thought it is a very great opportunity to step back and sort of and review all the progress so far, and also great opportunity for you, you know, to tell our audience, you know, about what you do. You know, a quick introduction about yourself, background, your company background, and also how long have you been in business, and so on and so forth. So if you like a quick introduction to the audience, that'd be amazing, please.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Andrew Shilley of a company called Rockhouse Chartered Building Surveyors. And we've been practicing as a surveying practice for over 30 years. Okay. It used to be a family business called Shilley and Associates, and we've always worked in the local area. But a couple of years ago we rebranded to Rockhouse Chartered Building Surveyors just to move with the times and modernise the company.
Sure.
As a practice we specialise in what I'd call development surveying. Sure. And in this context that's party wall surveying, helping clients, residential or commercial clients, dealing with party wall walls, i.e. dealing with the neighbourly issues that come when you're trying to build a development on a tight site. And we help deal with neighbourly communications, scaffold access licences, sure, crane oversail licences, and all the things basically relating to neighbourly issues whilst doing development on building sites.
I've got a few questions here that I'm going to fire across you. That's okay with you. So hopefully help our audience as well. So let's start with, what is a party wall?
Okay. So a party wall is effectively a wall that sits astride a boundary between two owners. So the boundary line between the properties theoretically runs through the middle of the wall, whether it's directly in the middle or slightly to one side or the other. That's classically what a party wall is.
Right.
In terms of party wall awards and the party wall process, when people are doing party wall awards, because I'm sure you're going to ask me when it's necessary to get it involved, sure, there's actually a party wall, which is, as I say, a wall that's shared between two owners. It could be the wall that separates you from the neighbour next door. When you can hear the radio going at 11 o'clock at night, they're on the other side of the wall, so it's a shared wall. But if someone's doing development work to cut away from that wall, a chimney breast, or cut into the wall for a padstone or a steel beam or something that might affect the wall, then you'd need to serve a notice for that. But there's also two other scenarios where you'd need to serve notices. Mm-hmm. They are if you're putting foundations in the ground within 3 metres of the neighbour, okay, or the neighbour's structural wall, yeah, and you're going lower than the foundations of that neighbour, mm-hmm, there's a perceived potential risk that could occur and may cause damage if it's not looked at. Sure. And also if you're within 6 metres and you're going particularly deep with your foundations, maybe piled foundations or a deep trench, and that foundation cuts a 45-degree line from the underside of the proposed foundation up to the underside of the neighbour structure. Once again, if you can imagine like a big basement, if you're digging a massive hole within the structure next door, then it could shift in bad weather. So there's these scenarios that occur where in those kind of situations you need to serve a notice. There's one more where if you're building a new wall on the line of boundary, sure, where there isn't currently a wall situated, then you need to serve a notice because you're putting new structure onto a boundary between two neighbours. So that's the kind of last scenario that is involved.
I see. Okay, perfect. That's really good. Really informative there. So how long, I know this is, you know, how long is a piece of string, but typically how long does it take to get a party wall agreement in place?
So if I do the overview and I then talk a little bit about the process that goes through and how that lends itself to the time frame. So on a simple domestic, you know, you're at home, you're doing a rear extension, on a simple domestic party wall award, you could expect that award to take anywhere between 2 weeks to a month. Depending on the response from the neighbours and so forth. Mm-hmm. If you have a larger development like what we've done here, where there's 8 neighbours, they're all doing different things, appointing different surveyors, and there's holidays and so on and so forth, everyone's moving around, it could take up to 6 months. Right. It may be longer. There are ways to try and streamline the process to make it more effective and efficient, but if you said in your mind roughly between a month to 6 months, on average, unless there's extenuating circumstances or the site's particularly sensitive to the neighbours, that's what I set out as a gauge.
Okay, so that's really good, really informative as well. And for all the developers out there, key, this is critical path, because without the party wall agreement in place, you know you're in trouble. You know, you get sued, your project can stop, and difficult, very difficult to move forward. All right, so the next one I have for you is, so who pays for the party wall? So let's say I need to get a party wall agreement for my site. So who does it need to pay for my party wall agreement, and you know, for the neighbours surveyor as well, who's sort of an estimate as well? That'd be good for the audience, so they know roughly how much money they need to allocate for each project.
Gotcha. So who pays for the party
Yeah.
wall when the neighbour wants to do it,
Yeah.
and how much should a party wall award cost on average
Correct.
if you're doing it at home? Okay. So because the person who's going to be doing the development work is instigating the development process,
Yeah.
and as a result of what they're doing is requiring the neighbour to potentially have a surveyor,
Sure.
in any normal circumstance and reasonable circumstance, the cost of the neighbour surveyor falls to the developer or the building owner who's completing the work. Now, I stress that's reasonable costs. There are extreme circumstances where the adjoining owner's surveyor may be charging unreasonable fees, and potentially, without getting too complicated, some of those fees proportionally could fall back to the adjoining owner
Sure.
if they're disputed.
Okay.
But in any normal circumstance, and within my 15 years of experience personally, we've never arrived at that scenario, and absolutely typically the building owner or developer will be paying for the fees for the surrounding surveyors and so forth.
Right.
You mentioned average fees as well. Now they can range, once again, depending on the complexity of the job.
Sure.
If you had a simple award,
Yeah.
I'd expect that you should pay your surveyor, as the building owner surveyor, around $950 plus
okay.
VAT.
Okay.
That can vary. You're always going to find someone
yeah,
cheaper,
yeah.
so it's middle of the road. And if you're paying for the adjoining owner's surveyor, then that will be roughly around, I'd say, between £1,000 and £1,200.
Right.
They charge a bit more because they have to go back to site at the end of the job to check off the scheduler condition,
That's it.
to make sure if damage has been caused or not caused, and so on. So they charge a bit more money, but that's roughly what you'd expect to pay if it was just you doing work and one neighbour.
Just
Obviously,
one, in this case, just only one party wall award.
yeah, one award with one neighbour. You have your surveyor, you have their surveyor.
That's it.
Now, it gets a bit more complicated because there's lots of different variables,
Yeah.
and I'll try and keep it succinct. But basically, the neighbour could appoint the same surveyor as you, so you have what's called an agreed surveyor, and in that circumstance, the fee might be less because you're getting one guy to do all the work.
Yeah.
You might find that you have multiple adjoining owners. You might live, for instance, in the middle of London where you're doing a basement dig on a residential house. There's 2 basements next door, leaseholders upstairs. So you've got leaseholders and freeholders, and for a simple extension, you could be doing 5 or 6 awards.
Cool.
I like to think, and the way we work,
Yeah.
is that when there becomes multiples of any given award, we start looking a little bit more competitive at the price, because there is an amount of repetition,
Sure.
not loads, but an amount. So in my humble opinion, that should be reflected in the costing as well. But I think as a good gauge, if you expected to pay around, if you just said £1,000 per award that you'd have to do,
Right.
per surveyor involved,
Okay.
that would give you a good starting point, and you might save some money, or it might be slightly more, but at least you're covered.
Covers.
Generally.
Okay, perfect. That's really good. Thank you for that. Right. Right. So my next question is, if there isn't a response from the neighbour, what the procedure is, because obviously that will hamper my critical path, and my project will be delayed. So how do I tackle that if I have no response whatsoever from a neighbour, or neighbour lives abroad, or whatever? What would you do? Yeah.
So the Party Wall Act, the Party Wall Etc. Act 1996, in case anyone wants to Google that, is what the legislation is called. And the whole purpose of the legislation is that when neighbours are building close to each other, notices are issued to start this party wall process, and it's there so that, one, the neighbour is protected in case any damage is caused to their property,
Sure.
but 2, so that the building owner, or the person doing the work, is enabled, it facilitates them getting on with the work.
Yeah.
So there's no sticking points between neighbours if you need access onto the neighbour's land, or you're cutting away from a wall, or whatever it might be. So there is a fixed process that enables the building owner to move through a natural progression to ensure that there are no hold-ups. And the process is as follows. The first notice goes out to the neighbour, and that's what's called a 14-day notice.
14 days. Okay.
So from the date of that notice, or give or take a couple of days because of Royal Mail to deliver it, the neighbour has 14 days to either consent to the notice, dissent, which is the formal way of saying, I'd like to appoint a surveyor,
Okay.
so to consent or dissent, I'm sorry.
Okay.
If they don't do anything, because they might have gone on holiday, they might not live at the property, or whatever the reason is, they don't respond, they want to be difficult, which does happen of course, then after 14 days, the surveyor can serve what's called a 10-day notice, which then tells the neighbour, look, we've served the notice on this date, we haven't heard from you now, so to enable the process to move forward, if we haven't heard from you in a further 10 days, give or take a day or two for Royal Mail, then we will appoint a surveyor on your behalf.
I see.
So that then if the neighbour wants to be difficult again, or if they decide I'm going on holiday and I don't care, or whatever, you get to the point where the surveyor that you've appointed can appoint another surveyor. Okay. You can't appoint yourself, because it's about being transparent and impartial and professional, but you can appoint another surveyor to represent the adjoining owner because they haven't been able to pick a surveyor themselves. Okay. So that's, in answering your question, that's the process involved to stop the whole thing coming to a halt and the neighbour like holding up the process. The worst case scenario is if the neighbour decides they want to be difficult or for whatever reason they're not around, that you might be looking at up to a month to go through that notifiable process to get to a point where surveyors are appointed. Sure. If you're talking to your neighbours, then all the better. When the first notice goes in, knock on the front door, say hello, introduce yourself and make sure they feel comfortable, and you could even ask your surveyor to give them a call to explain the process because it can be quite confusing. Absolutely. And some neighbours obviously appoint surveyors immediately, so that whole month of lost time might only be a week or 2 days if the neighbour acts quickly. But yeah, so your worst case is a month for the notices, and then once the surveyor's appointed, then you've actually got to negotiate the award after that. But at that point, the two surveyors are going through the award process. They'll form an award. It's their job to do that. So that whole process means that at some point along there, you're going to have an award in place that won't stop you developing.
Absolutely. Great nugget out there. Thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on with the questions I have here done here. So this is key actually for all the developers out there, guys. So how do you ensure that the project starts out properly, in your view?
This is a really good question. Because it's always very difficult. So the one question we always get asked as a party wall surveyor from the developer, from the client, whoever it is, when can I start the work? That's all they care about. And I mentioned before in our discussion that party wall surveyors are a little bit like the devil in the room, or the white elephant in the room. You kind of need them, but you wish they weren't there because they kind of are fulfilling a role that ultimately you're paying for, but hopefully you'll never need to draw on. It's a bit like the AA, I say. It's like the fourth emergency service. You're glad you're paying for it, but you don't really want to ever break down. But when you do, and they pick you up on that dark road, you're really glad that you've paid your AA membership, right?
I'm glad we have you, by the way.
Yeah. So the point is then when there's like any damage calls, although you're paying for this award, you're kind of super glad when the issues occur that you have surveyors to help deal with it, rather than it all going straight to court, because you can save a load of money.
Absolutely.
Okay. So in terms of your question, I'm sorry, and how can developers or people doing extension work try and make sure that they minimise the impact of the award, I can only suggest that they start the process as soon as reasonably possible. So in my opinion, what's the absolute earliest time to start? During planning, basically. If you're pretty sure, so through the planning process, they'll do a site visit, the council, and at some point you'll be in discussions where they might say to you, look, it's going to go through a couple of tweaks, whatever. At that point, if you know you want to start the work ASAP, you can serve the party wall notices and get that process started, so that at least that notifiable period we spoke about is underway. So you're not just killing time with the builders waiting to go. You could even do that as soon as you put planning in if you wanted. You'll pay a small amount of money for that. But if the notices get issued, a surveyor is appointed, you can always put the adjoining owner surveyor on hold and just say, look, we're going through planning still, we're so glad you're here, but please just hold, don't do any work on it, and as soon as we get planning we know we can go, then we'll engage you and we'll move the process forward. You do pay a small amount of money for that, of course, because you're getting people to work, but at least you've dealt with this potential dead time where you're doing 14-day notices, 10-day notices, and like if you're sitting there scratching because you want to get on with the work, at least you know you're being productive and proactive. So that's a really good tip in terms of trying to get a step ahead if you're willing to just spend a little bit of money to get the notices out. Otherwise, in terms of making sure that you can streamline the party wall process for the surveyors, I would recommend that you issue your drawing packages, your engineering drawings, method statements from contractors, and your construction drawings from the architect as a package. Right. So rather than drip feeding the adjoining owner surveyor with a bit of information that he picks up, reads, puts down, picks up, reads, puts down, and then another bit, and he's got to open the file again, and it's costing you more money. That if you go, well, here's everything at once, he brings it all out on the table, reads it all in one go, and then comments, it's just so much more efficient a time frame. So if you can coordinate your project team to deliver their information in that way, that helps the process massively, because it means that
fewer iterations and
I get it. You can minimise revisions and so forth. The last tip which we do as a practice is that when we have issued the notices to the neighbours, the first thing we do after that is we put our hat on as if we were the adjoining owner's surveyor, and we actually write to the building owner, the developer, and we say, if we were the neighbours' surveyors, here's the questions that we'd be asking, so that then you're giving the opportunity for the developer or building owner to produce that information up front, if they want to be a step ahead again. They might say they don't want to pay the architect for additional revisions that the neighbours' surveyors haven't asked for yet. But if they wanted to be super on it, then why not get all this information put in place? If they don't ask, at least you've got the info, and if they do ask, you can go, here it is, done. That's another good way that we try and help our clients just get a step ahead. Because it's all about saving those little increments of time that in the long run across this whole project can save a lot of time.
Makes sense a lot. You know, particularly here at our project, we know at the beginning we were aiming to have a wrap slab, reinforced concrete wrap slab, as a superstructure, but then we had issues with the party wall, the foundation, so we went into piling, and that created a sort of iteration process in there. That at the end, as part of a critical path, is obviously, you're dead on in there. If you get that stuff sorted up front, right at the start, you're up for a winner.
Can I add on a little bit to this? Because it's just, while it's on my mind, one of the things we did really well on this project, and because it's a larger project, it worked really, really well, was there was a weekly team meeting, 2 o'clock on a Friday, I always had it in my diary. Where we all logged onto the computer, shared screen share scenario using, I think, like there's an app called Zoom, or another one called Join.me, and it means everyone can look at drawings on the screen and discuss and do a bit of a pre-start meeting. And the point is this, from a party wall perspective, because we're always relying on other parties within the process, a survey for that neighbour, a survey for this neighbour, they're going on holiday, they've got 10 jobs on as well. It's hard to always know exactly where you're up to. So if you do regular weekly site meetings or team meetings, at least even if it's 2 minutes, you can just go, where are we up to, what's going on, and it means you're always in the flow. You can address any queries that come up immediately, and it really helps just keep people accountable and moving it on. And I think it might be a bit overkill on small jobs, but definitely big jobs, but on small jobs do it as well. Why not? Get everyone together if they're willing to do that, and it just helps tick things along. Keeps people accountable, knowing they've got to be at the meeting, knowing they've got to update. It's just
makes perfect sense. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Well, I've got another question here for you as well, very key one. Right, so it's a very simple question, but do you think, under what circumstances would you get a party wall surveyor appointed before the site purchase?
Okay. So just to set the scene here, you're looking at a site as a developer. You're thinking, I want to put flats on that site, and you're thinking, shall I get a party wall surveyor involved? Okay, my answer would be, I wouldn't instruct a party wall surveyor. I would engage a party wall surveyor to give you advice about key things to consider in the design that could be party wall related. So that when the architects are then designing their scheme to suit the site you're buying, you can already consider, I'm going to raise that wall, we're going to have an issue with scaffolding access, like we have on the site we have had here. The neighbours have got boiler flues overhanging our site. How do we do this? And the party wall surveyor comes to the site with a completely different frame of mind to anyone else on the project team, because they're used to dealing with the neighbours and the issues that become apparent with neighbours, so they're able to bring that knowledge. And I wouldn't necessarily, as I say, engage a party wall surveyor to start doing notices and things, but definitely just to get advice. What should we consider? How can we make our designs better? I mean, the amount of times I see architects design schemes. It's not a negative, by the way, but they design schemes, and you just say, oh, if you just move your wall over 4 inches onto the boundary line, rather than stepping off of that gutter, get rid of the gutter, do a parapet wall with a box gutter on the inside, then you've got rights for scaffolding onto the neighbour's land to build that 2-storey wall, as opposed to having to do a scaffold licence, which could cost you thousands of pounds.
Absolutely.
So it's just a little bit of info can go a long way.
Absolutely. I mean, in this kind of things as well, you know, for you guys that are new there, if you have construction drawings and you have to modify all the construction drawings, that takes a lot of time. And money. Whereas if you do it right at the beginning, get the input from the, you know, from the party wall surveyor right at the start, you avoid all of that iteration process.
And so that's why it's so important. I mean, whether you don't do it at the start of the site, pre-purchase, because a lot of the time the developer's just thinking about what can I get on the site, you know, how many flats, how many stories, la la la. But it might be that prior to submitting drawings to planning, that there's a little team meeting with the architect, so that the drawings can be reviewed, that's what's been designed, and then allowances can be made before it's submitted. That's also completely acceptable, of course, because invariably doing a development site in London where you've got or Essex, but where there's a site and it's surrounded by neighbours, you're going to have party wall issues. So it's just doing it at some point where you can get the input to help alleviate the problems.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for that. Right, next question I've got for you is, what skills have served you best as a party wall surveyor?
Communication.
Yeah.
I think, if I'm honest with you, I think that communication is the #1 skill set in any job.
Sure.
Just because of how much value it can bring. But communication as a party wall surveyor and being able to communicate with neighbours who are anxious, the defences are up, they don't want to let you on their land, they've objected to plan applications. If as a surveyor you can read all of that up front and approach the neighbour in a soft way, appropriately soft way, so that you can kind of massage their concerns and make sure they're getting looked after, it goes such a long way, because I can't stress enough how that kind of enables things and problems to be resolved quickly. Equally, if you can read a neighbour's going to be particularly obstructive, and that's just their demeanour, and that's fine, because there's 1,000 personalities in the world. But if you can read it up front and you can communicate these issues to the building owner, then you can do things in advance to help save time there as well. So communication, being able to express yourself, and that is, if you are looking for a good party wall surveyor, bar, you know, how many years in industry, what qualifications do they have, Google reviews and Facebook as much as they're worthwhile, you know, reading recommendations and testimonials. But do you feel like they communicate well? Do you feel like they're professional and can understand your concerns and can then deal with the neighbours in a sensitive but professional way that's efficient? All those little things wrapped up in a package is what I would say is a perfect surveyor.
Okay, perfect. That's really good. Thank you for that. Right, so moving on now. Obviously, there are a lot of cowboys out there that call themselves party wall surveyors. And then obviously, if you appoint the wrong person, you know the consequences. So my next question is about, how do you avoid appointing the wrong party wall surveyor? What key checks developers need to make before the appointment?
Okay, this is a sensitive topic, and I will be mindful of my wording, just because obviously this is going to go on into the public forum, and I don't want to offend anyone. So some of the obvious things you can do is double checking who the surveyor is affiliated with, what professional body. Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, as we are, is a professional body. The Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors is another professional body that's come up in the last 5 years or so, maybe a bit longer, and they specifically assist in training and or affiliating surveyors to be well orientated in party wall matters. I'd say then their experience in party wall, you can usually gauge someone's experience from conversation, you know, if they seem if the price is too cheap and they're not saying much about it and not offering much value, then usually it means the experience is maybe limited. If they can demonstrate to you quite easily that they've done a number of jobs, can talk to you and they know what they're talking about, then I think that goes a hell of a long way. And the majority of the time, the way that we satisfy clients' concerns, if they ask us about experience, is as soon as we look at the scheme they want to do and we start talking about the issues involved, how to get over those, the time frames, you demonstrate knowledge, usually that's a good indicator that they are then covered. Obviously, you want to make sure they've got professional indemnity as a construction professional. So that's really important. We're insured up to £1 million, for instance. As I say, regulatory bodies, and then just doing your bit of due diligence in the background.
100%. You know, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, personally, I'm a retired chartered civil engineer, and but still governed. I'm still a member of the ICE, and I know, you know, there is some attributes. There is, you know, you're governed by the rules basically, and obviously, if you want to keep your membership up, you need to comply with those rules. So that obviously keeps, you know, a lot of people, a lot of cowboys out of the
cowboys. I mean, it's hard to say. So to give you an example, and I'm not saying what I'm about to suggest are cowboys, by the way, at all. But some architects and or engineers are chartered surveyors, and I know a number of architects who are very, very, very good like surveyors. They know, as in party wall specialists, we won't say surveyors, but they're party wall experienced, they know what they're doing. Engineers are also equally good if you find the right one, because they're looking at things from a structural perspective, and if they've got experience in the process, then equally. I think the challenge is sometimes, as a layman, if you don't know about the process and your architect saying, I can just serve a notice and we'll get it buttoned up easy peasy, you might just want to take a breath and take a pause and just say, okay, you know, we can do this what would seem to be a cheap way, or we can do it the proper way, because sometimes doing things cheaply and quickly can cause problems later.
Yeah, cutting corners is not the best approach, especially when there's a lot of money involved.
Especially a development. You might take a bit of an approach like that if it's a small domestic project, because you know what, the Party Wall Act it's a legal process. You are legally required to serve a notice on the neighbour, but it's not, it doesn't stop you having an informal agreement with your neighbour. Yeah. If you get on with your neighbour John and you take their kids to school in the morning and you share barbecues over the fence and all that, and you shake your hand and they say, no problem, just carry on with the work, we don't need an award, we'll save you some money, that's fine. Absolutely fine, that's amazing. And typically on little residential projects, I almost encourage it, because you know your budget is fixed, you've got your life savings, you're trying to do something to change your family's world in terms of developing the house. Absolutely. So if you can do that and have an informal agreement and a handshake, then do that. I'd 100% recommend just getting a little letter signed that says, you know, we hereby will make good any damage, and you can even serve a party wall notice and just have them consent to it, so at least the paperwork's done and it sits there. But it just covers the worst case scenario, because what's equally important is that on residential projects, neighbours could be best friends in the world, but there's a certain little thing in the air with property and your home that if something goes wrong, the neighbour's back can go up. And it can ratchet up to 100 in terms of stress intensity very quickly.
Fantastic, right? That's really good, really informative. Thanks ever so much for your time. I think it might be a good idea now is just we go outside and look at our current project, because it's nothing better just seeing it physically, and then we walk around. You tell our audience, you know, what we have been doing for the last few months, and a couple of specifics, and that'd be good. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.